Welcome to the Bourbon and Brands podcast, where we have simple conversations with successful people over a glass of our favorite brown spirit, bourbon. What's up, Randy?
Oh, chilling.
Thanks for coming down from the land of Plano, Frisco, where that all runs together for me up there.
Yeah, all the P words.
All the P words.
Yeah,
the Prospers. And
I'm from the land of Prosper.
Okay.
Ironically, people from Plano say that that's Oklahoma, even though it's like 15 minutes.
And ironically, I've been to your house several times, and I still don't know what city you live in. So I'm a great friend.
Technically, I drove from Dallas today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you doing in Dallas?
I was doing a little bit of landscaping work on an investment property that I own. So I discovered that they charge around $200 to do a one-off mow on my half-acre lot.
Okay, a half acre in Dallas.
In Dallas, yeah,
that's a good size for Dallas.
Pretty good size, and then they don't like weed the beds and trim the hedges and all that. So I've made it a habit to go down every 2 weeks and hire some day laborers for a half day, and I go work with them. And so I got a little bit of extra cardio today. Yeah,
I'd say so. Yard work is no joke. Especially in the Texas heat, which is starting to cool down. So, I mean, if you're going to do some yard work now this time of year.
Today was glorious. I've been several times when it was warmer and it was not glorious.
It's like mid 70s, perfect weather right now to be outdoors. But so, yeah, thanks for jumping on with us, man. You are the one and only first guest of the podcast. So
my competitive nature makes me very excited about that prospect. I love being first.
You are first. You are the first to sit in that chair and to have a conversation with me over some good whiskey, which we'll get into that, of course. But man, the first episode here. I mean, so just to give you an idea of the premise of the show and kind of what this podcast is really about is just simple conversations with successful people, right? Over the brown spirit that we love.
Yes.
And so Bourbon and Brands is really an opportunity for people to pull up a chair at this table and just have a conversation with us and listen in to some folks who have found a little success in the business world, whether it be investing, whether it be marketing, whether it be building brands or whatever. We'll have tons of guests that from all different industries that have found a way to chase their passions and they're good at what they do. And I mean, there's valuable information in that, of course. And not to mention the whiskey we'll be sipping on each week will be interesting in itself. I love whiskey. You love whiskey, which is kind of how I met you, really, is through your podcast. But I think of it more of a YouTube channel because the YouTube, your following on YouTube is massive, growing, obviously, pretty quickly. But for the most part, I just ran across you on YouTube looking for whiskey information for myself. I would say I know a fair bit amount about bourbon, but, I'm a learner when it comes to that. And I'm definitely just getting started in my journey. So when I ran across your YouTube channel, I was like, this dude knows everything there is to know about whiskey, dude. Like you have, I don't know how many thousand videos on there, but it's like, every question that somebody would have, there's an answer to. Some of those your opinion, and some of those are just straight up facts that you've learned and researched yourself. How did you get started in whiskey?
I was a wine collector, and I'm pretty social, and I like to share. Wine is not super shareable. So if you spent years tracking down a really rare bottle of wine, and you crack it in a room with 30 people, there's going to be a problem, right?
Yeah.
One, you're not going to get to taste it, and two, it's going to be gone quick. But whiskey's not like that.
Yeah.
And so when I discovered that, I also discovered the nuance of whiskey because I didn't really start drinking until I was about 28. I'm 43 now. And once I discovered that there is nuance to different bottles and you can kind of break it down the same way that you do wine.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, well, I can pursue that area of my interest in this other category but also be creating opportunities to interact with other people, which is something that my spirit craves, right?
Yeah.
And so I just kind of switched my allegiance from wine to whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, obviously there's a massive taste difference. You still get that kind of ethanol, and you still get that aging, wine is aged and whiskey's aged. So similar in that regard, but they're two totally different spirits. So did whiskey take you some time to really develop a palate for and like an appreciation for? Because I know a lot of people just drinking whiskey for the first time, it's just like, man, this just tastes like straight up alcohol. And it takes time to develop that palate. So I'm curious, like when you moved from wine to whiskey, did it take you a little bit of time to really start to appreciate that?
Not exactly, because when I started drinking, I went on a trip with some friends of mine to Las Vegas, and I decided like, I'm going to try all the different alcohols and see what I like. So every night when we were at dinner, I'd try a couple different things. And I was just throwing out words that I'd heard before. Literally knew nothing about what I was ordering.
Was one of them smooth?
No, it would be like, I want a scotch and soda. I want a bourbon and Coke. I want a, whatever. Like, whatever drinks I'd heard of.
Okay, gotcha.
And I kind of liked whiskey. And so I went to the store when I got back, and I'm walking down the aisle, and I saw this bottle of 1792. And I was like, oh, this is a cool looking bottle. I had no idea what it was. It turns out it's called 1792 because that is the year that Kentucky joined the Union. And I bought it, and I didn't particularly love it. I didn't hate it.
Right.
But there was something in me at that point, because I was in my late 20s, and I was like, you need to be a man. Like, you need to learn to drink whiskey.
Yeah.
So I powered through. I ended up buying a bottle of Jack Daniels. I liked it. And Jack Daniels is a very approachable spirit.
Right.
And so I kind of settled on Jack Daniels. And at first I would, put it on the rocks with some water, and then just on the rocks. And then there's a period of time I'd keep it in the freezer, and I would drink it neat, but it was ice cold.
Chilled, yeah.
And then after a while, I got to where I could just drink it straight. And all that was happening while I was drinking wine.
Okay.
And so by the time I was switching from wine to whiskey, I was already accustomed to drinking Jack Daniels or Jameson neat.
Yeah.
So that transition was not a rough one for me. And because I'd spent so much time trying to analyze what I was tasting in wine and everything else for that matter, doing that with a neat pour of bourbon wasn't a leap for me.
Yeah. Now, do you still drink wine?
I do.
Yeah.
But not expensive wine.
So what kind of wine, what category of wine do you prefer? Or does it depend on the food you're eating?
I try to match the wine with the food nowadays. Yeah. That's when I drink the most wine. But the reason why I don't drink expensive wine anymore is because every year, one of two wines is typically the most expensive in the world. And it's either Domaine Romani Conti, which they call DRC, which is Pinot Noir from the French region that grows Pinot Noir, or Chateau Petrus, which is Right Bank Bordeaux. And those are typically one or the other is the most expensive every year. And I had a bottle of Chateau Petrus, and I opened it and I drank it, and it was like this really surreal experience, because I'd owned the bottle for a couple of years before I opened it, and I'd get it out and look at it like it was my baby, and then I was like, oh, this is not that much more enjoyable.
Okay.
Than, some $20 bottles of wine that I had. I don't know what that bottle's worth now, but when I opened it, it was worth $1,800. And back then I didn't have $1,800 to throw away.
Right.
So,
wow.
So now I try to pick wines that are going to meet up well with the food, meet up with my palate, but I don't see myself buying $1,000 bottle of wine in the future.
Yeah. And I've always wondered that, like, is wine the same as whiskey in the regard of, you've got these brands and this hype train around certain brands, of course, and those bottles are allocated and they come out if you find them in a store, it's super rare. And if you don't, you're paying, an astronomical amount for a bottle of whiskey. And, I've had some $600-700 bottles of whiskey, and I had a $30 bottle of whiskey, and I've preferred the $30 bottle before. So I've always wondered if it's the same thing with wine. Like, is wine the same thing? Because you see, this top shelf wine, just like you do whiskeys. In your experience with wine, is it the same thing? Or
yeah, for sure. I mean, price is a function of supply and demand, and when something gets known and there's only so much of it, there are people that have financial resources that they don't care as much about the price, and they drive the price up. And that's something that's hard for people to understand when I'm educating them about bourbon. It's like, okay, well, this bottle, it may retail for $250, but if you bought it for $250, you could sell it the next day for $3,000 or $3,500.
Oh, really? Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And so now you have this $3,500 bottle of whiskey, or you have a Russell's Reserve single barrel that you paid. I buy so much whiskey, and I don't even look at the price. I don't know how much they are, but say it's $55. You're like, okay, is this 60 times better?
Right. Yeah.
And the answer is no. It's absolutely not.
Right.
And often, if you tasted it blind, you would pick the less expensive one, right? Because a lot of times the reason why whiskey is expensive is because it's aged for so long and it evaporates with time, and so they've got all of this production and storage cost, but they don't have very much juice to recuperate the investment that they put into those barrels, and so it makes the bottle expensive. But what people often find is that the higher age flavor is not to their liking. It's not their profile.
Right.
And so it's the same thing. Wine, whiskey, it's about how much disposable income do you have to create that experience for yourself. And often it's the effort that you put into the experience that makes it memorable versus the actual flavor that you're tasting.
Yeah. And that's really what kind of turned me on to your channel. And I was like, man, this guy's doing something different with Bourbon Real Talk, is the fact that for you in the show, Bourbon Real Talk, it's not just about the spirit, it is very educational, of course. Like, you, again, are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the spirit itself. You share that knowledge. But if I understand the show correctly, the philosophy behind it and the mission behind it is to connect people, right? Is that communal experience that happens when you have whiskey out. And you can be from any walk of life, any religion, any sex, any race, any ethnicity, and you can pour each one of those people a glass of whiskey, and they can find something to talk about and to commune over. And it's just such a cool thing about whiskey, and that's why I love it too. And so that's probably why I love the channel so much, Bourbon Real Talk, is because it is like, that is the purpose of the show, right?
Yeah, and it goes beyond that. There's an argument to be made that beer, the production of beer, was created by humans to preserve resources, right? Because grains rot, right? But you can ferment them and you can preserve them for longer. But beer can go bad too, and then you can distill that and you can preserve the resource further. Yeah. And historically, the resources that are used to make beer and whiskey, and if you don't know, whiskey is just distilled beer. Yeah. Typically unhopped, but you could hop it. But what happened is you would have all these people that grew the resources that were necessary to make beer in a condensed area, because that's where the soil was ripe for it. That's where the weather was correct and the rainfall and all that stuff. And they'd produce all of this crop. And before modern forms of transportation, preservation techniques, and all that stuff, they couldn't get their grains to market. And there was more in that local area than the locals could consume. And so they had to convert it. And so historically, in Kentucky, a lot of whiskey producers were Baptist ministers that didn't even drink because they also had to be farmers to make a living, and they would, and that's the story of Elijah Craig.
Well, I was going to say, is that Elijah Craig? Yeah.
Yeah. And he's not the creator of bourbon, as the label suggests, but that was not an uncommon story. And so what's interesting about that is that if you are a religious person or you're not a religious person, you can't argue with the fact that part of human history views spirits as a communal resource. We did this to preserve resources that humans need to survive.
Yeah.
And I think that that's why you'll even see somebody who in their business life is very selfish and stingy, but when they collect whiskey, they're very free and giving with their whiskey because there's something in the back of all of our minds that says, no, this isn't just for me.
Right. Yeah.
We have to share this.
Yeah. My quote and that I say pretty much every time I drink with somebody is that whiskey tastes better when enjoyed with somebody else. Right. Like, yeah, I'll have a glass of whiskey in the evening by myself at home. But man, there's no replacement for the joy you get from being, around a campfire with a bunch of guys or just standing on the patio or sitting on the porch with other people and enjoying the same spirit, not talking about it, not reviewing it or anything like that, but just talking about life, man, and connecting on a different level. So speaking of the whiskey for today's episode, we decided that we would take a look at 3 of the 4 core Blanton's offerings, right? The only one we're missing out of their kind of core group is the Special Reserve. But these are 3 pretty heavyweights in the whiskey community, I would say. A lot of people listening, watching who have been whiskey fans for any amount of time have probably either been looking for a Blanton's single barrel or has tried one or has one on their shelf right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty like, hey, if you're going to tell somebody to start a whiskey collection, most people that they ask is going to say, yeah, well, you need to have a Blanton's in there.
Sure.
And it's just kind of a cool bottle. It's a cool story. Seeing that they kind of created the single barrel back in 1984. But aside from that, it's got a lot of hype. Now, me personally, I'll be honest with you, the Blanton single barrel is not one of my favorite whiskeys. It's not. I'm just not a fan of it, a particular profile. But I do like the gold, and which is technically, the same distillery, same spirit, just at a higher proof. I don't know what it is about the gold, but I do prefer it over the single barrel. But I'm excited to crack this straight from the barrel because, as you can see, it's not been opened to drink yet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, I mean, we've had it before, of course, but this particular bottle, it's always fun to have a fresh crack on the show. But we've got the single barrel that we've just kind of finished up here. And I think it's time that we rinse and get ready for the gold next. Give that a try.
I typically don't rinse between Blanton's pours because it's all the same spirit.
Yeah, well, it's the same spirit, but
different proofs.
Yeah, but it's just kind of, I feel weird when I don't rinse.
Because, well, do you have lint-free racks?
I don't.
Okay, so what would happen is that if you dilute gold with single barrel, it's closer to gold than the remnant of water that would be in your glass after you drink water.
That's true. Okay, we're going against the code of whiskey drinking, and we're not rinsing.
Right. Well, and so I usually teach people that you need to rinse between pours.
I learned that lesson from you.
High end pours, because you're drinking so little typically when you're at a tasting. When I taste whiskeys, I taste between 1/8 and 1/4 of an ounce. So if there's even one drop of something else in there, it's going to affect the flavor. But we're pouring a little bit deeper. It is the same spirit, and it is what's the remnant of what's in my glass is closer to what's in this than this water.
Right.
So for that reason, I would suggest let's break protocol.
Okay. Right. We're doing it. As long as I'm doing, if I'm going to break any kind of whiskey protocol, it's going to be with you.
Okay.
Because I feel like you are in a better way to say it, kind of my whiskey mentor, I would say. I've learned a lot from your show. And dude, I've drank a lot of whiskey with you. So if you're doing it, I'm doing it.
I'm hoping to be a lot of people's whiskey mentor.
And you are.
Or I've wasted a lot of time.
No, you are. I mean, one thing I love about your channel as well is the interaction that happens. And you answer every freaking comment that ever happens on your videos, it seems like. I mean,
personally. Yes.
Yeah, you personally. And so it's cool to see that your videos aren't just got thousands of views, but those people are commenting as well. That engagement when talking in business and marketing terms is massive, right? For any brand. And I consider Bourbon Real Talk to be a brand, of course, that's growing, and that interaction is crucial to your fan base sticking around, I would say.
I mean, if you're going to have a channel about connection,
yeah.
Right? I
can't ignore them.
I feel like I have to get on there and respond. And, the volume but honestly, it's my favorite part of my day. Right. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's how I procrastinate. Mm-hmm. Is I go respond to comments and replies on my channel. If there's something that's in my to-do list, in my business to-do list that I'm really not looking forward to, I usually find myself going and checking my comments. Yeah.
It's kind of your time kill kind of.
Right.
And before you know it, it's been 3 hours and you're like, okay, I better get off YouTube.
But there's a downside to that too, because I mean, the channel has over 1 million views now, so some crazy people have seen it statistically, right. And people say some crazy stuff,
right? Yeah,
and so you gotta take the good with the bad, and that was a difficult transition for me as I've started this, because I think for the most part when people start producing content, educational content that's absolutely free, and they're just putting it out there in the world. They have a good heart, and they think like, oh, I'm gonna help people, right? And there's a dark side to that, where there's a certain percentage of people, especially people who knew you before you started producing that content, that go, look at this arrogant guy. Who does he think he is? He's no better than me. I've seen him. There were stuff that he didn't know that I knew. Look at him now. He thinks everybody should just worship him because he has a channel. And I don't think that the average content producer thinks that, but people who feel that way will come on and try to discourage you. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of channels fail. Maybe not because their content's not good or their production's not good enough, but just because they don't have the intestinal fortitude to press through that initial wave of hatred that you get when you don't have anything to hang your hat on. Right. And anytime any brand or any really YouTuber, influencer, whoever comes out to the world and kind of puts themselves out there as an expert on whatever it is. Right. Makeup, whiskey, beard products, like just whatever. Pick the YouTube channel. If that person's doing anything more than just playing around with toys or whatever, just vlogging their life, they're trying to become an expert on something. And for every one of those people, there's going to be a hater that comes out of the woodwork that feels like they know more than you, or you're basically giving them ammunition to point out flaws, because especially in something that's to do with whiskey, because I could ask you what flavors or what notes you're picking up on that whiskey right there, and some of them would be different than mine because palates are different. Sure. So when you're becoming an expert on whiskey, there's just so many techniques. There's so many different just variables between the people tasting the whiskey that it's easy to find reasons to hate somebody else. Which I love you're saying at the end of your podcast. It's if it's so easy for people to hate others, it's just as easy for me to love others that I don't know. And so that's really cool. But what do you? I will say the one thing that I'm getting from this, and I'm curious if you do as well, from Blanton's in general, is like a medicinal, like kind of cherry medicinal flavor. Do you get that with Blanton's, or is that just my weird palate? First off, your tasting notes or anyone's tasting notes are never weird. If that's what you're tasting. Yeah. I kind of get that like not cough syrupy, but like a medicinal taste. I get what you're saying. And what was interesting is I was drinking something else before we switched to the Blantons. So, and that's why when I drink, I don't drink all of one thing the whole night.
Right.
Because there's palate influence.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually have good palate days and bad palate days. There's days that like my palate's just super focused on vanilla and caramel and, barrel flavors. And there's days that all I can taste is fruit. Mm-hmm. And there's days that everything tastes bitter to me. And so you have to keep that in mind. But when I tasted this, I tasted it was an off flavor that is in the direction of medicinal. Yeah. But it's not the same like cherry cough drop flavor that I get from like 1792. Yeah. Right. What's interesting for me about Blanton's, which is Buffalo Trace Mash Bill 2, is that I get peach. It's the only spirit that I consistently get peach in tropical fruits. So pineapple, mango, guava, and peaches. Yeah. I can see that a little. For me, it's a little sweeter of a peach, almost like a peach cobbler type, like what you would like like the syrupy part of the peach. And keep in mind, if you're ever listening to tasting notes about whiskey, there's always a sweet influence to whatever it is that you're tasting because of the sweet flavors that come from the barrel, since all bourbon has to be aged in a new barrel, and the corn. And so there's going to be it's not just peach, right? It's going to be peach with vanilla and whatnot. Yeah, and so
brown sugar or something like that.
It may taste more like a peach cobbler, right? Yeah. Because often there's a bit of a yeasty flavor because there is malted barley in it or whatever, right? Yeah. So it's a combination of flavors, but you're just trying to pull out individual notes. But
that's a good point, because a lot of people will throw out the fruit that they're smelling, like, oh, I'm getting banana, or I'm getting a dark fruit or a peach. Right. And people are like, they who don't really taste whiskey, their mind automatically goes to like the super tart, fruity, like that, like a candy flavor of that. And it's like, well, like you said, you are going to have a sweetness to it. So it's almost like a dessert with that. So like Old Forester, for example, has a very heavy banana flavor to me, and it's almost like a Bananas Foster's. Yes. Right? So it's like a dessert, like a banana that's been caramelized, you know? So that's definitely interesting. Now, the only difference really between the single barrels and really all of these is the proof. You got the 93 proof on the single barrel, the 103, and then in this straight from the barrel, this is 129.6.
And straight from the barrel just means they dumped the barrel. They didn't proof it down with any proofing water. So whatever it is, it is.
Whatever it is. I've seen them 139. I've seen them, up there close to that hazmat mark. And it's just one of those high proofs. Now, when we've had this conversation, and you actually put a video out about this not too long ago, the word smooth. Now, when people, now, of course, that term gets thrown around just by everybody who wants to be a whiskey drinker or has ever seen somebody drink whiskey. They feel like they need to drink something. And if it's not too bad for them, they'll just say, oh, that was smooth. It's just kind of the go-to catchphrase. So I know a lot of whiskey people like hate that term. But those people who I do respect, like yourself, if you were to say something was smooth, chances are you're talking about the fact that it's a 130 something proof, but it's balanced enough to where you wouldn't be surprised if it was a 90 proof. You know what I mean? It doesn't, the bite and the sharpness is not what the proof number is, so that, at least when I say something smooth, that's what I mean.
There are two scenarios where I struggle to avoid the word smooth.
Yeah, exactly.
And one is where like when I'm tasting a whiskey, and it's just like wine, you have the attack, the mid palate, and the finish. Right. And intensity builds very quickly with a spirit. It peaks, and then it starts to trail off. And when a spirit, like if you had a camera above me and you just saw what I did with my fingers, I drew a bell curve. Right? Yeah, right. And
that camera view is coming soon.
Yeah. So there's something that happens sometimes when you're tasting whiskey, that there's a spike in part of the process where something's like, and it sticks out. That's a whiskey I would not call smooth, but there are whiskeys that I've tried that have like a perfect bell curve, and I'm like, okay, that was a perfectly predictable ride from beginning to end. I could smell it. It's what I anticipated, right? And then the other thing is for me, it's a little less of this. But if something is a hazmat and when I drink it, it drinks like it's 120 proof.
Right.
I want to say it's smooth, but I've conditioned myself to say it drinks below its proof.
Right. Yeah.
But when I think about the flavor experience being a perfect bell curve, that's when I'm like, I want to say smooth.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if I do, the whiskey nerds are going to get upset.
And that's what I will say about the straight from the barrel that I've had before, is that it does have that bell curve to me, to where it does have a fairly long finish, at least for me, where the single barrel doesn't. Shorter finish for me, but the straight from the barrel has that balance to it, to where you could be drinking something over 130 proof, but you wouldn't be able to guess it, just by that. You look at that sticker and you get that sticker shock, so you're expecting that bite, that sharpness, that steep that steep curve instead of that bell curve. And really, at least the times I've had it before, it wasn't the case. Now, tell me what you know about Warehouse H.
So,
which is where all of these bottles came from.
Yeah. So Blanton's is an interesting product because it is produced by Buffalo Trace, but they do not own the brand. So the name Blanton's is owned by the beverage company, the Japanese beverage company that owns Kirin beer. Kirin?
Yeah.
Kirin?
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it. And so, but they have a production contract, licensing arrangement, whatever. And so, what's interesting about Blanton's is that it always comes from this one warehouse, and this warehouse is very different. So if you ever tour Buffalo Trace, all their aging warehouses are brick. And so there are brick facade aging warehouses, which are very insulating. And so things age slower there. And then there are corrugated steel warehouses,
Heat up
which
quicker.
They heat up super fast in the hot sun. They cool down way faster than the brick warehouses. And so things age faster there, because think about aging as temperature differential changes, right? Yeah. And so there's only one metal facade warehouse on Buffalo Trace's property, and it's Warehouse Age. Yeah. And it got built post-Prohibition because they were trying to get some more aging space quickly so that they could get some product out to the new hungry market. And so if you are African American and you listen to this podcast, you should love Blanton's, because the story behind Blanton's is Freddie Johnson, who is currently a tour guide at Buffalo Trace, great friend of the podcast, love him. His father created Blanton's with Elmer T. Lee.
Elmer T. Lee, you're right. Yeah.
And so his father was a barrel warehouse manager. So he helped them put the barrels in the warehouses, get them out when they were ready. And the people that worked in the barrel warehouses, you hear these old stories from back in the 80s and 90s before like modern times. Yeah. Most of those dudes drank all day, and they wore overalls, and they carried a straw in their overalls. And you hear stories from Eddie Russell saying, like, I got taught early from my family that if you go out with the barrel warehouse guys, like, let them go into the warehouse for the first 30 minutes. Don't go in there as their manager and let them get their drink, or you're going to have a bad day, because they're used to going in and getting their drink, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of these barrel warehouse guys knew where the good barrels were coming from. And Mr. Johnson was no exception to that rule. And he discovered that there were some honey barrels in this Warehouse Age. Yeah. And so when they were trying to figure out a way to save bourbon, because bourbon was doing very bad back in the 70s and 80s and 90s even, he said, what if we did a single barrel? What if we showed people what a barrel can really do? Mm-hmm. And that was a novel concept. It's very expensive to do it that way. Mm-hmm. But they needed a way to sell the whiskey for a higher price. And so Blanton's was the first single barrel. It was the first ultra premium bourbon sold in the United States, and it was the brainchild of an African American man that I believe he's in the Whiskey Hall of Fame, and if he's not, I'm sure he will be.
He will be and should be. Now, I also heard that with the Blantons, and specifically before this has started in Warehouse H, that Elmer T. Lee, had specific barrels that he, like you referred to as honey barrels, of course. But whenever he would entertain guests or entertain people, he would go and pull from that single barrel. And that's kind of like how the idea, I guess, started with Mr. Johnson and Colonel Albert Blanton, of course, being the namesake. Was he the president of the distillery? Is that
the history gets so confusing, but I
think it was the distillery president.
That I couldn't disagree with you. Yeah. Okay. I can say that when Elmer T. Lee received his Lifetime Achievement Award, he pulled Mr. Johnson up on the stage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's cool.
And because regardless how you look at it, African Americans were not as celebrated in bourbon culture as they are today, even just 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so the fact that, Elmer T. Lee did that recognizes the fact that when you're making bourbon, you're all just family.
Right. And that's the cool thing about the history of bourbon is that it and that's, maybe that's why the connective power is there, because it's not just one race, one country, one people group that came up with it. Scotch is Johnny Walker's the largest whiskey brand on the planet. Just behind that is Jack Daniel's. And Jack Daniel's story is pretty interesting because it was also an African American slave that kind of played a major role in the distilling process of teaching Jack Daniel's, how to do it. Right. So I love that about the culture of it. And, maybe that's why it's connective, right? Yeah. Maybe that's where the power comes from. So, let's talk a little business real quick, because I know that you've got a lot of things going on. The podcast and Bourbon Real Talk is just one of those things.
Sure.
But as a kind of a real estate guy, you've found a really unique niche in the Peas area of the world you live in, the Planos, Prospers, and whatever else is up there. But the cool thing about what you do that I noticed is like every real estate agent gives a gift, right? When you close on a house, or at least they should. If you're a real estate agent and you don't give your buyers or sellers a gift at closing, you probably should be fired. But you give some sort of gift of some sort, right? Every time I've sold or bought a house, I get like a gift card, or I get, a basket or a welcome mat to put on my front door or whatever. But your gifts absolutely make me want to have you sell my next house, which my wife would kill me if we ever sold another house. But you buy people.
I'll kill you if you sell your house. I've been to your house. The only person that you can sell your house to is me.
Right. Do I still get the gift?
Yeah.
Can I live in the guest house? I'll just stay out there.
That's fair. Yeah.
But yeah, the idea that you came up with is brilliant, because it really, your niche, your demographic, I mean, you'll sell a house and help any family in need, I'm sure. But you have a lot of whiskey lovers kind of gravitate toward you because of your gifts that you give at closing, which are a bottle of whiskey, and not just any bottle of whiskey. Okay. You're not giving them like a Jack Daniel's or an Elijah Craig or 1792. Nope. You give them like a $700 or $800 bottle of whiskey. It's like a William Little Weller. I've seen you give somebody a George T, a Happy 15, a George T Stag.
17. Yeah.
I need to find a house to have you sell for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be my house, but I'm just going to find it. Do you do referrals? Like if I find somebody for you, do I get a bottle too, or how's that work?
I can only give you a referral gift of $50 per state law.
Is that retail?
Yes.
Okay. Cause that's like a Stag Junior.
Right. Yeah. So if you're a business person, or you want to be a business person, and you want to be, encouraged, right? Just realize that you don't know what you're doing, right? You don't and you don't have to. That's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is that you fail faster than your competitors, right? You try everything that doesn't sound ridiculous, and even some things that do sound ridiculous. And you keep doing the things that work, and you stop doing the things that didn't work. And that's it. That's business life. If anyone tells you otherwise, go look at any famous band, right? And they're like, you're an overnight success. And they're like, yeah, 10 years of grinding it out and then
playing in dive
one
bars
hit and now I'm an overnight success. Screw you.
Right.
You don't know what I went through. And that's business. And so for me, you know, I was a real estate agent, and if I can encourage people out there that are business people, I want you to develop multiple streams of income. Yeah. Because you know, some businesses are cyclical. You need multiple streams of income. And I didn't have that, but I've also found, and this is super weird, that motion creates emotion, you know? It's like one of those things where it's like, you can be hustling in your business and you start to experience success and you're like, wait a minute, the success that I'm experiencing didn't have anything to do with the thing that I was working on. But somehow God or the universe or whatever recognizes the effort that you're putting in and starts opening doors. Right. Or at least not locking the windows so that you can crawl through there. And so that's kind of what happened with my real estate business. Right. And you know, you made the comment about closing gifts. I don't give closing gifts. I just don't do it. And the reason why I don't do it is because I'm not the best real estate agent in the world, but there is certainly no one that could produce a better result than me. So there's other people that are as good as me, I suspect. There's not many. But my closing gift to my client is follow up, support after you buy the house. I mean, I remind people to change their filters. I reach out to them every year to see if they want to dispute their property taxes, all that stuff. You know, I'm your realtor for life. But me giving you oven mitts that have my brand on them, it's like, it feels disingenuous. Like we became friends when I was helping you buy your house. And so I don't want to just give you some silly thing, you know, that you didn't really want. And my goal is to get you to share my brand. And it's like, well, if I did a good enough job, you'd probably do that anyway, as long as I stay in touch with you. And so I traditionally, I haven't done a lot of closing gifts, but I was selling a house to somebody that I met from the whiskey community, and in the Facebook group that I co-founded, which is going pretty large.
Someone say whiskey, right?
Someone say whiskey. We have a policy that, you know, you can't self-promote. And so I've never made a post like, hey, I'm a realtor, and if you need a realtor, let me know. But I was selling a house for somebody, and I thought, you know what? I love this guy. Right. And I'm going to make a good bit of money off of him hiring me. And he only hired me from the club, and I'm going to give him a nice bottle of whiskey. And I think I gave him a George T. Stagg, and he posted it. I didn't ask him to post it.
Because they can post it.
They can post it. Right. They can go like, hey, look what Randy gave me. Right. And then everyone goes, why'd Randy give you a George T. Stagg? Oh, he helped me buy a house. Right. And then I got like 3 or 4 leads that resulted in crap tons of revenue. And I was like, wait a minute. And so that's why I want to encourage you, like, you just do everything until you figure out what works. Right. I mean, you don't spin yourself into the poorhouse, but you better get close if you want to find success. Right. And so that's kind of what happened with my business. And so now I've kind of developed a policy that if, you know, people know, if you're from the whiskey world and you hire me to be your realtor, I'm going to buy you an Epic bottle. When we sit down to talk and you ask about it, I tell you kind of what my equation is. I usually blow the budget by about 20% because I love my customers and I don't care that much about the money. But yeah. And then, you know, they post it, and then I get, you know, another lead, and I'm off to the next deal.
There you go, man. Like, and that's the type of thing to me that with Brandland, whenever I talk with clients about marketing, let me hand you that. Whenever I talk with clients about marketing, and really anybody else in the business world, when it comes to marketing, there has to be a genuineness and an authenticity to it. Like, it cannot be something that's not you. You know what I mean? Like, your brand has to shine through clearly with whatever that marketing piece is. Now, whether you view these bottles of whiskey you get your client as a marketing gift or not, they are in a roundabout way, because they do end up sitting on their shelf and there's a story with that bottle. Somebody comes over there and tries it. Man, how'd you get a George T. Stagg? And then there's the story. Or it goes up on the Facebook page and everybody's like, how did you get that? Oh, Randy gave it to me. So it becomes a marketing piece. And that's the best kind of marketing, is one that wasn't intended to be, but it authentically and like genuinely became that, because it was just a representation of who you are, which is a generous person. Sure. Right. So with any brand, you can make that work with a donut shop. You can make that work with anybody. A barber shop, a real estate person, anybody in business can rethink their marketing in such a way that, hey, how can we market to the public by just being who we are? Right. And we don't have to put up a billboard and just do or put out flyers or direct mailers or all these things necessarily. Those things work, but they don't work as well as you just being you in public. Sure.
And let me say that, this started on accident, but I do it on purpose now. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right.
And some people that may irritate them. And I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on your podcast, but I don't give an F about those people.
Now, the people that get irritated by that are probably not the people getting the bottle.
Sure, and there are people that were probably never going to buy in to what I have to offer anyway, right? So it's what I want to encourage business people out there to do is look for the win-win, right? And never do anything selfishly. And as long as your value proposition is beneficial to your client, it's okay to try it, and if it works, then ramp it up.
Right.
That's me, right? I test, like I said, I fell faster than my competitors. But when I find the thing that works, I figure out a way to do it at a level that no one ever thought of. So if you've ever received a phone call from a real estate agent saying that they have a buyer that's interested in purchasing your home, I apologize to you, because I created that. And it was like 2014, I think. And
that technology or that system?
I created the system.
Okay. I remember the story.
And it was like 2014.
Yeah.
And I had been working with investors. The market started to improve. We lost like 80 bids in a row. I didn't have any deals under contract. And I was like, I've got buyers that are looking for houses, but I just can't, I can't find them any houses. And so I bought a list of people that owned houses in an area that my buyer was looking, and I started calling them. And by the grace of God, the first person I called was like, my wife and I had been talking about selling the house. It ended up being a dead end, but it was proof of concept.
Right. Yeah, it was just enough for you to keep doing it.
So what do? I go out and I find a software that has an auto dialer function to it that's not technically an auto dialer according to the state of Texas laws. Right. Because it requires you to interact with the software after each phone call.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Which that's what makes it not technically an auto dialer. So I wasn't breaking the law. I hired an attorney to review, do not call list regulations and all that stuff. And I put together a system, and I hired 2 people to sit on this auto dialer type software all day long. And, I did it until it stopped working, and it stopped working because we were calling over 1,000 people a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And there was 2 of them. So we're calling 10,000 people a week.
Wow.
500,000 people a year. And there are 40,000 real estate agents in North Texas, and enough of them heard the pitch and thought, I wonder if this works.
Yeah.
And started doing it, to the point that some of the people that I had hired to do it started getting phone calls where they repeated the exact script that I had created. Right. Yeah. And so I did that until it stopped working. But that's what you have to do, right? You have to test your ideas. You have to trust your own business judgment, and you have to not lose faith whenever it doesn't work.
Right.
Because you just have to understand it's not going to work most of the time. If all you did is turn out brilliant business decisions, then you would not be here. You'd be on Wall Street.
Most of the richest people in the world have been bankrupt several times. Just where they've hit a rock bottom, have to start again. Bad business idea, bad investment. I heard an interesting tidbit today that the majority of the top, I guess, Forbes 400 or the top 400 richest people weren't born into that money. Mm-hmm. They were born poor or low class, low to middle class. And it really speaks to the grind mentality that you have to have, that nothing's given to you. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what makes those people like a Bill Gates or, the people who are born just lower class, but they end up becoming billionaires because of their like bad idea after bad idea after bad idea. And then they finally hit that one and they just grind. They just keep grinding. They don't take no for an answer.
Right.
And that's like, been my story up to this point too. I mean, I've had several different businesses, and out of all the businesses I've started and been a part of starting, I have 2 today, so it's just like, you learn those lessons. Some of them work, some of them don't, some of them are short seasons, some of them last a long time. And so you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head with that, because it's just a part of business.
And it never ends up being what you thought it was going to be when you envisioned it.
Yeah.
But I mean, is this camera on me?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that y'all will be able to see this, but do you see that right there?
I see it. Yeah.
That's the scar for me donating plasma when I was in college.
Okay.
When I went to college,
the moneymaker.
Yeah. When I went to college, my dad was Heisenberg. He was a methamphetamines manufacturer. He went to prison right before I went to college.
Not the actual Heisenberg?
The story might have been based on his story.
Right.
The Heisenberg story is that he was a high school chemistry teacher that thought he was terminally ill.
So was
cancer.
Your dad a high school chemistry teacher?
No, my dad was taught to make methamphetamines by a man whose wife was a high school chemistry teacher.
Okay.
And he was terminally ill with cancer.
Okay.
So when my wife came to me and was like, oh, there's this great new show. And keep in mind, when it came out, my dad was still in prison, right? And I'd grown up without my father.
Yeah.
And my wife was like, there's this great show, but I don't know if you'd feel comfortable watching it because it's about manufacturing methamphetamines. I was like, all right, what's it about? And she's like, well, it's a high school chemistry teacher who uses his chemistry knowledge to learn how to make this really special meth. And but he does it because he thinks he's terminally ill and he's trying to get enough money to take care of his family.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, babe, I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but my dad was taught to make meth by a guy that was terminally ill with cancer, and his wife was a high school chemistry teacher.
Yeah.
So I'm not watching that show. And so, when I went to school, I had grown up thinking like I was going to have the typical, privileged, experience in college.
So how old were you like when this started?
Well, my dad was a meth manufacturer when I was a small child and got busted the first time when I was 6.
Like in Texas somewhere? You
yeah,
in
Texas? Carrollton.
Okay.
On the border of Carrollton and Farmers Branch. Remember it like yesterday. They kicked the door in, had a battering ram, dropped it on the floor, chipped the...
and you're just chilling in there playing Atari or what?
I was eating a pickle. I had bitten the end off and I dug all the seeds out.
Yeah.
With my finger.
Definitely remember it like it was yesterday.
And I had a piece of bubble wrap. The youngins aren't going to know this, but
yeah,
back in the day, cathode ray tube televisions had static electricity on the screen. Mm-hmm. And I had a piece of bubble wrap that my mom had given me because I liked to pop the bubbles when I was 6.
Yeah.
And I had discovered that I could stick it to the TV with static electricity. And so I had stuck it to the TV and it distorted all the images, right? Because of the refraction of light. And I had the pickle stuck on my thumb when the SWAT
came right through the door. Wow.
And
you, how old were you?
I was 6.
6. Okay. Yeah.
My mom was on the phone with my aunt planning my brother's first birthday, and
I'm assuming your mom knew about all this, or was this a surprise for her?
Oh yeah, there was like a huge lab in the. It's sad. Like it'll get weird if we talk about why my mom's not crazy, but my dad was abusive. But anyways, so yeah, so there was a SWAT guy, and I had whatever type of weapon. It looked like AR-15 or an M16 or something, he, drew down on me on the couch, and he's like, hands up, and so I put my hands up, and I got
a pickle in your thumb
sticking off my
that's amazing,
my thumb, and to his credit though, once they secured the area, he picked me up and he held me while I cried.
Yeah.
So he was just doing his job.
Yeah.
But
so yeah, how long did your dad go away?
Well, that time he went for, he went in when I was 6. He got out when I was almost 11. So he's in for about 4.5 years.
Yeah.
And then he was out until I was like 16 is when he got busted again. And then
same thing or something different? Yeah.
And then he was in for almost 18 years, 17 and 3/4 years. And so, the whole, like, I thought when I went to college, like, oh man, it's going to be a cakewalk. My dad was telling me, yeah, I'll pay for your school and all that stuff. And then, he gets busted. And so, when I went to college, I was bootstrapping it. I went to my dad always told me, like, your grandfather really believes in education, and so he'll pay for your school. And I went to my grandfather, he said, I'll pay for your first semester, but after that, you're on your own. And so he paid for my first semester. I went out and I got, but I didn't get meal plan because no one in had gone to college.
So what college did you go to?
Texas A&M.
Oh, okay.
No one in my family had gone to college, so it wasn't like somebody like explained to me how it worked.
Right.
When you're a freshman, you had to live on campus. So I picked like the cheapest dorm that had AC. That was my strategy.
Yeah.
Like, pick the cheapest dorm that had AC. And then I didn't get meal plan. And so when I got there, I had to get food for myself. But my dad wasn't around to give me money. And my mom and my stepdad, they weren't rich. And so I found out you could donate plasma. So I donated plasma twice a week. I had to walk there because I couldn't afford gas money, which is sad because it was like a half mile from my dorm.
Yeah, and gas then also was sad because it was like 99 cents.
Yeah, it was 99 cents a gallon. And so I'd go in and they check my temperature and all that. Never eat. I was so scared, right? Because if I caught a cold, like, I was done. Like, no food.
No food.
Yeah.
That's wild.
So I donated twice a week. I got $15 in donation, and every 4th donation, I got an extra $5 because I had antibodies for chicken pox.
Wow.
So when I had that extra $5, baby, I was
eating
rich.
Good.
Oh yeah. That was the week I would go to Taco Bueno and flirt with the unattractive girl to get her to give me extra nacho cheese.
Even though you had the extra $5, you still wanted to get it free?
Hey, well, no. I first off, Taco Bueno was a splurge, number one.
Right.
But since I was getting something that had nacho cheese, I was like, hey, any extra nacho cheese you could throw on there, it'd be much appreciated. Like, I don't want you to get in trouble, but you seem like a nice girl, so maybe. And so that's how I lived. And so now I live in a nice house in a nice area, and I don't really worry about money. You don't need to donate
plasma anymore?
I don't have to donate plasma. I donate to a lot of charities and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And every so often somebody will start talking shit about me and all of that, and I'm like,
let me tell you
something. Have you ever washed paper plates? Washed paper plates.
Yeah,
because
that's wild, man. That's a crazy story, man. And so that gives me even more respect for you that I had before, because I didn't know that part of the story. I knew about your dad and everything, but man, like, to see where you're at today, you can obviously give a lot of credit to God, higher power, whatever you end up believing in. But there's a reason you're here today, and I believe it's because of what you're doing for not only the people that you just meet in your real estate life, but the people through your podcast and your show, man. I've heard of so many of those guys reaching out to you, in a down spot because of the story of your brother and the philosophy of the show, realizing that, hey, there are people who out there in the world listening to this podcast right this second who feel like alone, feel disconnected. And the power that we have with these microphones that people use for bad, you can equally use for good. and can help connect those people to other people and help them to feel involved and feel loved and appreciated. And so I think that that's, from the stories you've told me of the people who've reached out from watching your YouTube channel, that makes all of the struggle worth it in itself, right?
Sure.
Like all the washing paper plates worth it because this guy is going to decide to wake up again tomorrow because of what message you put out there through a YouTube video. So kudos to you, man. Cheers. I'm super stoked to be your friend. And I mean that you've made a big difference in my life, not just from the whiskey stuff, but just positive impact. So, thanks again for coming on the show. Let's let everybody know exactly where you hang out online. And that is on YouTube, Bourbon Real Talk, first of all. So go subscribe to that, of course. And, if you're a whiskey fan, you're watching this, I mean, that's the place to get information. There's a lot of resources, but it's a genuine place from a genuine guy who you've heard from yourself. Also, Someone Say Whiskey is the club that you referred to earlier, and it's nationwide.
Yeah.
I mean, are there actually people out of the States?
There's a handful.
Okay.
There's not a ton, but there are a handful.
But yeah, that's a great place to get connected. I joined that club a while back, and that's how another way I met Randy is through that. So I kind of connected the two, and I just felt like I need to reach out to him. But Someone Say Whiskey is a super inviting club. It's there's no shortage of whiskey groups on Facebook, but it's one that I can genuinely say that people are like, no matter what you post, if you post something dumb that you might regret and they ask a dumb question, whatever, those people are pretty kind and they're like understanding of everybody's journey, that everybody's in different places. So that's pretty neat. So go check that out as well. What else, man? What do we need to close with? Do you got anything?
I just want to encourage the listeners, right? Yeah. I assume if you're listening to this podcast, right, you're listening because you're interested in either bourbon or business, right? And if it's bourbon, then, have the journey you'll have. Yeah. Right? Go out there, explore, have fun, join a community, drink with other people, get to know others. If it's business, I can remember, it's hard to say how many businesses I'm a part of right now. I think it's 5, right? The podcast, which we'll throw Someone Say Whiskey in with that. Right. The real estate company, my funding company that's kind of like a hard money lender, the Prideful Goat, and Unallocated. And there have been so many directions that I've gone in that didn't pan out, that didn't work, but it didn't stop me. Right? Imagine a football game where there's no time clock. You don't determine a winner until someone quits. Right. That's business life.
That is.
Right? It doesn't matter what the score is. Yeah. Right? Because you have an unlimited amount of time to make it up. Yeah. But also understand that when it comes to business, to win, you have to be insane. Because there will be points in the process where when you appropriately analyze the information that you have in front of you, the logical conclusion will be to quit. And there are going to be much easier, less stressful, more guaranteed ways for you to make more money. And that's why everybody doesn't do it. And it's why most people quit. Yeah. And so when people, and we alluded to this, but at the end of my podcast, I have a sign off that references that I have a brother that committed suicide. And so when people reach out to me and say like, hey, I'm thinking about becoming a real estate agent, or I want to start my own business, I say, listen, if you want to do that, do it. But you better be sure. Yeah. Because at some point in this process, you'll look up and you'll go, I've irrevocably screwed up. There's no path forward from here, you know, whatever. And you won't see a future for yourself. You'll be in a place of desperation the way my brother was. And you have to be so sure that you know that when that happens, you just keep marching on. And I promise you that if you have that level of commitment and you just keep charging ahead and you keep learning and you keep failing forward, that you absolutely will find the level of success that's right for you.
Yeah.
And that's what I want people to know.
Yeah. That's golden. That's golden right there. And that's why I love the connection between whiskey and business, is because both of them are all about relationships. So if you're in your bourbon journey and you're just trying to get there, you better start developing some relationships.
Right.
Because that's how you get to where you want to be. And the same thing with business. Every successful business owner has mentors, has friends, has relationships, and growing a business is all about relationships. So thanks again for jumping on. This is the first episode. So there's a lot more where this came from. Randy Sullivan in the studio with us for episode 1. Thanks, man, for being here. I look forward to our friendship continuing and this podcast and what you can do. So until next time, man, cheers to you. And thanks again for being here, man.
Cheers.